How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Infinite Sports. I'm your host, Kenneth Gruenfelder, and it is upon us, everybody. Baseball season is about to begin. Got the Yankees and the Giants about to start the regular season for Major League Baseball on Netflix, as a reminder. So we'll get into all that. I'll give you some predictions, division winners, World Series prediction as well before we wrap up the show. I also did want to talk about a few other things because it has been a little bit since we last spoke. The World Baseball Classic concluded. Very exciting tournament. And Team Venezuela took home the gold medal, winning 3-2 against the United States. And, a dramatic finish to that game, I might add. Venezuela up 2-0 going into the bottom of the eighth inning. Bryce Harper hits a game tying 2-run homer. And Harper, like many of the other players in this tournament for the U.S., you know, didn't have a great tournament. And he needed that in a big way. That would have been one of the home runs you're going to remember forever had the U.S. gone on and won the game. But they ended up surrendering a run in the top of the ninth inning, and Venezuela ended up winning 3-2. Players very emotional after the game, as we saw throughout this tournament. This meant a lot to the players. It really did on this grand stage. Whether it was Venezuela, whether it was the Dominican Republic, you know these players really cared about this tournament, really across the board, and the tournament was a huge success. It really was. I mean, I was really invested in it. You got to see the best of the best, playing for their country, and it's a shame that it's held every 3 years, but maybe in the future that ends up being changed. As a possibility it could be held later in the season. Maybe it substitutes the All Star game. That's something that could be explored in the future, but it was a success, and we got a good championship game. I know a lot of people out there think that Team USA really didn't care, but I said it time and time again. It's just, they don't have the flashy celebrations like the other teams have. They don't have a jacket. They don't have the espresso machine in the dugout. They didn't have all these factors, all these celebration. I don't want to call them gimmicks, but I mean, I guess that's kind of what they were. Like the other teams did, but they did care. I mean, they all came out of the dugout when Bryce Harper hit the home run. Bryce Harper was, going nuts over the homer. But, Team USA, that their offense, it really never got going in this tournament. But it's been headlined by Aaron Judge. He was the poster child for Team USA's performance in this tournament because he was the captain, because he plays for the Yankees, because the MVPs, and he's regarded as the best player in baseball. But he gets knocked every chance people get because it just comes with the territory. I think it's unwarranted because this is a team sport, and you look across the board. I mean, a lot of guys didn't play well in this tournament. I mean, Cal Raleigh, who was the runner-up to Judge last year, didn't record a hit, didn't play really, in the final couple games. Alex Bregman didn't have a great series. Bryce Harper, up until that home run, really didn't hit well. So it was a collective effort that led to Team USA's demise. But because, again, it's Aaron Judge, and, Judge did good in the pool play, but once we got to, where it really counted, Judge struggled, and he struck out a decent amount. But I think it's kind of unfair that, I mean, I guess people just expect him to hit a home run every time he gets up. Now, he's hit a lot of home runs over the last, few years. He's hit a lot of home runs in his career. But do we really think it's realistic that he's going to come up and hit a home run every single time he gets up? Like, it's just not going to happen. All right, he's also a guy that hits for average. When it comes to being a hitter, he's, again, I mean, he's really, to me, greatest hitter I've ever seen. And obviously, in the grand scheme of things in the history of baseball, I have this small window. out of the 100 years that baseball's been around. But Judge, that's how great he is. It's just before Judge, to me, it was Miguel Cabrera. I mean, the couple years that Cabrera, in the early 2010s, the numbers that he was putting up, the Triple Crown, the MVPs, and then all of a sudden Judge came along and, he kind of stole that title. But, Judge is held to a very high standard. Now, to me, it was a lose-lose situation for him had he delivered in the World Baseball Classic, had he delivered in the championship game, because had he had gotten, a home run after Bryce Harper to put him up 3-2 and the U.S. goes on and wins, everybody would have said, well, it's a glorified exhibition. He doesn't do this in October. We got to see what he does then. But when he fails, the haters have no problem coming out and showing out on social media. And look, at times, there were some at-bats here you're like, what is Judge doing? But the WBC was a lose-lose for him, in my opinion. Where it's really going to matter is October. But I also said this on a previous show, okay? That narrative that he doesn't perform in the big moments, I think, needs to be put on ice because of how well he played in the postseason last year. Guy batted .600. Guy hit a huge home run after the Yankees were trailing, 6-1. They come roaring back. They tie the game. They end up winning. You think, well, maybe the Yankees could turn this series around. It didn't happen. But you can't blame Judge for the Yankees losing in the postseason last year. And he's had big moments in the postseason prior to that. The Class A home run. But I know now that is getting dismissed because of, what Class A got himself caught up in. Even though, come on. Look at the pitch that was thrown. I don't think that he was grooving a pitch to Judge or he, had some kind of wager in that moment. But, it's the easy route for these people to just say, yep, that's another one that doesn't count. And the Yankees did lose that game. They did. But still, that was a big moment. And he's had big moments in the postseason, even before that. When he first started, getting his feet wet in the major leagues. He got things started off for them in the, the 2018 wild card game against the A's. That's one. He put them up 2-1. He hit a home run off of Verlander midway through the game 2 in the 2019 ALCS. And you thought, oh, could this be it for the Yankees? Could this get them to obviously they would have had 2 more games to win, but, all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, they won very convincingly against the Astros in Game 1, and then all of a sudden you're going up 2-1 against Verlander in Game 2, and you take that game, and all of a sudden 2-0, and, you go back to Yankee Stadium. But that didn't happen. So, people like to pick and choose. Now, look, is Judge a great postseason player? No, he's not. He needs to do more. And the Yankees need to go on a deep playoff run, and he needs to be at the forefront. That's what needs to happen. They need to win a championship. That is what will completely eliminate this narrative that he's not a clutch player, that he can't deliver in the big moments. But he has delivered in big moments. Me personally, I just think it needs to be put on ice temporarily because of how well he played in the postseason last year. But if you're not a Yankee fan, or, if you're more of a Judge hater, you're not going to put that to bed. You're going to, every chance you get, like I said, you are going to knock this guy down. And I don't think that's something that, I don't think he deserves that. Because not only, the player that he is, the person that he is, he leads by example. And that he's a guy that you want to have as the face of your sport. But for some reason, again, it just comes with the territory. It just comes with the team that he's playing for. That's why he gets this criticism. And listen, that's always going to be there. But I just think some of it. But some of it just goes a little too overboard. Like, even with the speech that he made prior to the tournament, look, was it the greatest speech in the world? No. But I, are we really just going to nitpick everything this guy does? And yeah, like, didn't show up with the bat in these later games, but he got a huge out in the game against the DR where, Tatis is trying to go from first to third and he throws him out. Like, he threw a couple of guys out. He threw Tatis out, and then in one of the pool games, he threw somebody out at third base. Like, yeah, sometimes he didn't do it with his bat, but did it with his defense. He's also a good defender. He's not a guy that just hits 50 home runs a year. He's got multiple tools at his disposal. Can hit for average. Is a good base runner. Can field. He's got a rifle of an arm. And he's showed that on full display in this tournament, like I said. And hopefully that the elbow injury that's, behind us. It looks like it is for the moment, thankfully. But, I just think people, some of it, again, some of the criticism just goes too far. And it gets too ridiculous. Like I said, the speech that he made, really, that's we're gonna just do that. Come on. But it's just gonna keep on happening. Judge has to have a big year, big postseason. Yankees need to go all the way, win the championship, and if they do that, and he's the main reason they do that, you can't say anything. But the Yankees got to prove it. They got to prove that they can go deep into October, and they did it a couple years ago. We understand that, but that gets dismissed because of the path, right? Yankees can only beat the AL Central. And then when they face the Dodgers, we saw how that went. But you can also say they did shoot themselves in the foot, which they did plenty of times in that series. And I do think that, I know Judge obviously dropped the ball out in center field, but I did think at the plate you saw a different guy as opposed to the beginning of the series. He started to turn it around. And who knows if the Yankees win that game 5 and they go back to LA, what would have happened? I mean, I still think the Yankees lose ultimately, but Judge was getting out of that slump that he was in. But played well in the playoffs last year. Just the Yankees didn't go far enough. So will the Yankees go far this year? Well, that remains to be seen. So before we get into, more baseball, again, WBC, awesome. Really enjoyed it. This was, again, first year with the tournament that I was the most invested. I mean, partly it was because Judge was playing in it. But also, again, just seeing all the different players, all the star players, playing in this tournament. But now, if you move that into the middle of the season, everybody's going to be in tip-top shape. You're not going to have guys leaving. You're not going to have these restrictions with the spring training. You're going to get everybody at their best, and I think that would be beneficial for the sport. So we'll see what happens. And does that turn into an every year thing? Again, we will have to wait and see. But I would be in favor of that. I mean, I love the MLB All-Star Game. I think that, me personally, that's my favorite All-Star Game out of the main sports. It's hard not to try. Like the NFL is just a complete joke, right? The NBA, same thing. I mean, they've tried different things. It just doesn't really work. I know people like the skills competition. I get that. And hockey, and the NHL has theirs. I mean, the Four Nations tournament, that, everybody loved. So, baseball can try to adapt to that. Speaking of the NFL, I didn't watch the flag football the flag football games over the weekend. So Tom Brady threw a touchdown pass, and then on the 2-point conversion, he threw it to Gronk, and Gronk ended up hurting his hamstring. Not even not even from catching the ball and running and falling. It was when he got back up, he tweaked his hamstring, and he was out the rest of the time. But the USA flag football team, they wiped the floor with the NFL players. There was talk with how the NFL players didn't know the rules. So Yeah, but Tom Brady threw a touchdown pass. Nice pass to Stephon Diggs. Everyone's like, oh, he's going to come out of retirement. Listen, Brady could still play. He's still in shape, but it's not happening. But yeah, I really I watched the highlights. I was I'm not really not interested. Wasn't really interested in it. Odell Beckham Jr. played in it. You know, um, we'll see. We'll see if if Odell ends up with anybody. If that caught any NFL teams' attention. I know some teams are probably like, man, could we get Brady to play quarterback for us, please? Um, but we'll talk about. We got to bring up March Madness though. Sweet 16 is this weekend. Elite Eight. One of the best tournaments of the year. A lot of exciting games, upsets. We've had some one seeds go down. Florida, defending champs, they ended up going down. They lost to Iowa. Um, St. John's advancing to the Sweet 16 for the first time in a long time. We in the right. What is it? It's the east part of the bracket. I mean, the coaches that you have: Izzo, Hurley, Patino, Shire. I mean, you got Duke against St. John's. You got Michigan State against UConn. I mean, that's Friday night. That's prime time. So those games, everybody's gonna have their eyes on that. But yeah, some exciting finishes. I mean, I always say this when watching the tournament. I mean, it's such a better pace than the NBA. I mean, you got I forget which game it was over the week. I forget which game it was. Was it the UNC game? I'm trying to remember which one it was, but it was just such a like the pace of it, back and forth, just trading buckets. Um, you know, it, it's such an exciting tournament. Obviously nobody has a perfect bracket left, but I thought Duke kind of was scaring us a little bit. Losing to Siena, a team from the MAC, my school, Quinnipiac's conference, early, and they ended up coming back and obviously winning, and they're in the Sweet 16. But no 16s, knocking off a one. Um, yeah, listen, it's now we get down to you know the nitty gritty with this tournament. It goes very fast. The first couple days, it's like the best. It's the best of the tournament because you just got wall to wall basketball the whole day, and then all of a sudden, half the teams are gone, and now you got the best of the best now, and you know Arizona is there. Like I said, you got Duke, Florida's out, Michigan. They're trying to make a run. As again the other one seed. So yeah, three of the four one seeds are still remaining. So we're not going to get what we had last year when we had all four one seeds making it to the final four. It's not going to happen. I mean, I so my final four. Now originally it was more chalked as opposed to what I ended up with as my final bracket. But I have Houston, I have Arkansas, I have Michigan, and I have UConn as my final four. And then I have UConn knocking off Michigan in the championship game. So I mean, this is a big weekend. This is really where what make or breaks your bracket and your bracket groups. Um, Michigan State's a team that I had going far last year. Um, I forget who they ended up. It was one of the one seeds. I think might have been it was either Auburn or was it Auburn or Florida that knocked them off. But now they're going to be taking on UConn, and I got UConn advancing. So knowing my luck, what's going to happen is Michigan State's going to end up winning. But I am really looking forward to St. John's against Duke. To see if St. John's can continue this run. Wild finish with their game too against Kansas. That was a crazy finish. They blew a huge lead, a 14-point lead, and then they draw up a play, great one-hand finish for the game-winning basket for St. John's at the buzzer. I mean, that was just an unbelievable play. They drew it up, and again, they're going to the Sweet 16. Haven't done that in a long time. And Rick Pitino has done a great job turning that program around. Yeah, it's kind of received some criticism because when they were up 20-3, right, to Northern Iowa in the round of 64. He's yelling at his players, and people are like, why is he doing that? And even after the game that they win this highly emotional game, against Kansas at the buzzer, and he obviously was celebrating with his players afterwards, and smiling, all smiles and everything, but had this straight blank face, and I don't know why some people don't like that. That is a brand of coaching that is slowly dying out in sports. And that kind of coaching, again, some players might not respond well to it, but that brand of coaching brings out the best in players. It really does. Players being players being coached like that, they want to be coached like that. They respond well to that. They need that. That fuels players, and you take that away. I don't know. So I had no issue with that. I had no issue with that. I think that branding of coaching, it is going to die out, but I don't think it should die out. You got to be tough on your players, and if they're not mentally tough, if they're not meant for it, then they're not meant to play for the team. It's the bottom line. But yeah, that was a great game. We had a lot of great games so far in this tournament, and it's only going to get better. It is only going to get better as we move along here. But yeah, you got this weekend, you got next weekend, and that's it. You know, I will be away though next weekend. I'm actually going away for a little bit, so I am going to miss. I mean, obviously I'll keep up with it, but I am going to miss the Final Four and the championship game. But rest assured, when I come back, we'll talk about it a little bit. But yeah, no, March Madness is in full swing. NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs are going to be starting soon. The Islanders are clinging on for dear life. I mean, that they're, in the Eastern Conference. It's amazing how, I mean, the Rangers are the only team that has a losing record, pretty much. And the East is just so competitive. If the Islanders were playing in the West, they'd be sitting comfortably in a playoff spot. But I know I think they lost tonight. So, we'll see what happens there. But quick NFL thing, topic. So the Denver Broncos, they acquired Jaylen Waddle from the Dolphins. Definitely was a lot, especially for a guy that's dealt with injuries. But you know what? Waddle's a good player, good receiver. I thought with the Broncos, the young receivers that they got and Cortland Sutton, I thought, maybe they were okay there. But, they go out and they upgrade at receiver. And let me get the specifics of the deal. It was, a lot for Jaylen Waddle. I mean, Dolphins, you got to like that deal for them. But, and again, it's not like the Broncos didn't get an upgrade. They did get an upgrade. But you had, some decent young receivers that you could, they continue to grow. You got Cortland Sutton. So the Broncos acquired Jaylen Waddle in a 4th-round pick from the Dolphins in exchange for the 30th overall pick this year and late 3rd and 4th-round picks this year. So 3 draft picks, a 1st-round pick. I mean, the Dolphins were asking for a lot for Waddle during the year. The Bills were a team, I think, that had interest, but, they ended up not going through with that. You get DJ Moore this offseason for a 2nd-rounder. But, listen, it's an upgrade. It's an overpay for Waddle, a guy, again, that's dealt with injuries, but, he helps his team. The Broncos game away from the Super Bowl last year, and had Bo Nix not gotten hurt, they would have been the team that represented the AFC in the Super Bowl, based off of how that game went. But we'll see. They're going to be very good. Travis Kelce got a new deal, so he's coming back for the Chiefs. We'll see what happens with the Chiefs. If they can bounce back from a rough year. But yeah, NFL stuff. We're going to talk about the draft when that comes along. Myself and Dami will continue to, do draft content. Maybe we try to do some kind of live event for one of the days of the draft. That is to be determined. So, we'll see how it goes. But I did want to bring up the Waddle trade again. Overpay. Broncos do get an upgrade. They're going all in. They brought back J.K. Dobbins after he had a good year. I know he got hurt, which he's another guy that does get hurt. But Broncos are in good shape. So let's get to baseball now. Back to the regular season of baseball now upon us. So this is a big year for the Yankees, obviously. I mean, it always is. Can they finally get over the hump? Can they get to a championship? And I think what is working for them is what I really like about this team going into the year is their depth. In years past, like you go back to 2023, when you had guys getting hurt, you had Billy McKinney filling in, Jake Bowers, Willie Calhoun. Guys go down. You're going to have Jason Dominguez come up. You're going to have Spencer Jones come up. And then I like the Yankees bench going into the year. The one pushback I'll have is just the fact that you're going to be carrying 3 lefty catchers. I do think they should have had a righty catcher because, you got Austin Wells, you got J.C. Escaro who made the team, and then you got Ben Rice who's going to be primarily playing first base, but he could also catch. But, kind of need a right-handed catcher in there, which they don't have. Is it the biggest deal in the world? No, but ideally that's what you should have. But they have probably one of their best benches they've had in years. You got Escara, you got Goldschmidt coming off the bench, you got Rosario, and then you got Randall Grichuk who ended up making the team. I like it. And you're running back the same lineup that was tops in baseball in a lot of offensive categories. Now, are they going to be able to repeat that? I think they'll be one of the top offenses in baseball, but it remains to be seen if they will be able to, put up those same amount of run totals. I don't know if you're going to get exactly that. Listen, I think the lineup's going to be good. There's certain positions where you do kind of worry about the level of offensive production. Third base, Ryan McMahon did not have a good spring. Is Trent Grisham going to be able to repeat his level of success from last year? I don't think so. I mean, it is a contract year for him. Technically, he's on a 1-year deal. So, it's another prove-it deal. Can he do it again? Jose Caballero is going to start the year at shortstop. I mean, Judge is going to do his thing. Judge is going to have another big year. I know even with the WBC struggles, I mean, guys killing baseballs. Hit another home run the other day off of Aaron Nola. So he's locked in. He's ready to go. Stanton looks good. How long could he stay healthy? Austin Wells, he's another guy. Disappointing year last year. Can he bounce back? There are definitely some question marks with this team. But I think they're going to be a very good team this year. They're going to be a playoff team. It's just, can they advance far in October? But yeah, going back to the depth aspect of this team. So like I said, certain guys get hurt. You got some young guys you can bring up. I mean, also Oswaldo Cabrera, in case another injury happens on the infield. Can play all the infield positions. Good to see him back out on the field after the injury he suffered last year in Seattle. But I just think this team, when it comes to their pitching, that's where the depth really comes into play. Because last year, your 4th and 5th starters were Marcus Stroman and Carlos Carrasco, right? And in case anybody else goes down, I mean, there's going to be no Rodon, there's going to be no Garrett Cole to start the year. But, you got guys like Yarbrough, you got guys like Paul Blackburn, and then some other guys in the minors. Actually, Luis Gil is going to be starting the year in the minors, but it's because how the schedule is set up. The Yankees are going to roll out a four-man rotation early on, but he's going to rejoin the team. And then you got some of the other young guys, Elmer Rodriguez and Carlos Legrand, who's really turned heads. Although didn't pitch well the other day against the Cubs, but hey, let's relax. Um, you also got Ryan Weathers, who's going to start the year in the rotation. The Yankees have a lot of options with their rotation. Will Warren has looked really good in the spring. I mean, basically the rotation, it's Max Fried's getting the ball on opening day. Cam Schlittler, Will Warren, Ryan Weathers. That's your rotation, and then Luis Gil will rejoin, and then eventually Cole and Rodon are going to come back, and then those guys, some of those guys are going to have to slide into the bullpen. Ryan Weathers is probably going to be one of those guys, and then I don't know. I guess I mean, could it be Luis Gil? Could it be Will Warren? I mean, we'll see. Somebody's going to end up getting traded. You know that's going to happen. Luis Gil, I know there's been concerns with him. I'm definitely concerned. It's kind of working through his mechanics, kind of changing his throwing motion. So we'll see if that pays off. Because I mean, to me, he's one of the X factors. A couple of years ago, won Rookie of the Year. If he could return to that form, I mean, that's just another weapon out of that rotation that the Yankees will have to go along with Fried. And, Schlittler has a big year, which I anticipate he will. And Cole comes back, and Rodon's healthy. Like, the sky's the limit for this rotation. And you need this level of depth, especially when you get to October. Because that gives you a huge advantage over some teams that, could be short on pitching. Then they really got to dig deep to get guys out in the playoffs. But the Yankees also got a hit in October, and that's something that's, plagued them for years now. So, I mean, the Blue Jays really beat them up, but, the first game they lost to them in the division series, you were losing 2-1. You had Gausman on the ropes. You could have opened that inning up. You really didn't. And then, the bullpen then just flat out collapsed. Game 2 was just a wash from the get-go. I mean, they could have lost had Judge not had a great game in Game 3. And then, Game 4, they just really didn't hit. I mean, they did give up 5 runs, the pitching did. But, I mean, that game was also close until late. Jazz Chisholm making a bad play, botching the double play ball. So, but the Blue Jays were the better team all year. They just were. And are the Yankees going to be able to hold off another June swoon? Are they going to be able to? That's something that remains to be seen. I did say I don't think it's going to happen again. But, once we get into the summer, once we get to June, they play the Red Sox. It just seems like every time they play the Red Sox, that's when the season just goes into a tailspin. But, how I look at the AL East, now kind of, getting into a little bit of predictions. I think I'm going to take the Yankees to win the division. This is going to be a tough division. The Blue Jays are there. You can argue the Blue Jays got a little worse, losing Bo Bichette. But the Blue Jays, I still think, are going to be a very good team. They pretty much have everybody except for Bichette. You added Dylan Cease this offseason. Okamoto, you added also to replace Bichette. Looks like he's going to be a good player. Obviously, Vlad, expect another big year out of him. It is going to be tough. And the Blue Jays play a brand of baseball that, got praised. I praised it because, they hit for contact, they grind out at bats, and that's why they deserve to be in the World Series, and they should have won that World Series. But like I said, Yankees pitching, get everybody back healthy. It could be the best rotation in baseball. I think that could propel the Yankees on top of a good lineup that's going to get you wins most of the night. Also beating up on some bad teams. it's gonna come down to how they do against their teams in their division. You know, you're gonna beat up on the AL Central. You know, you do okay against the AL West. You gotta win the games in your division. That's what it's gonna come down to. And you know, because of how they changed the schedule, everybody plays everyone now. You know, division games you don't have as much. So that's something that the Yankees are gonna have to, you know, go out and prove that hey, we could beat our teams in the division, in our division. So yeah, I got the Yankees winning the East. I got the Blue Jays in as a wild card team. I got the Red Sox as a wild card team. I think the Red Sox are going to be good. Their pitching is going to be good. I mean, you're adding Ranger Suarez. Now you got him and Garrett Crochet, two lefties, two southpaws. They added Sonny Gray as well to the rotation. Roman Anthony, I mean, stud. He's a stud. He's gonna have a big year. You know, the Red Sox missed him in the playoffs last year. You know, you had him in there. You know, we saw how Abreu did in the tournament, WBC. You know, the Red Sox are going to be good. They're going to be a team that, you know, is going to give you problems, and I think they're going to get back to the postseason again. You know, and you got Chapman closing games for them. I mean, you know, doesn't age. You know, doesn't lose speed on his pitches, that's for sure. In the Central, I got the Tigers. You know, I like their pitching staff. You know, big year out of Skubal. This is a contract year for him. You know, they choked the division last year, but you know, they still made it to the division series. You know, played a tight series with the Mariners, came up short, but I got them making the postseason again, winning the division. Mariners, I got making it out of the West, and then I'm gonna say the Astros get back to the playoffs. Okay, I know they're not, you know, this juggernaut that they once were, but you know, they're not loaded like they have been in years past. But you know, I think they get back to the postseason this year. So that's what I got out of the AL. Then for the NL East is tough. You know, Mets offseason got off to a rough start. You know, they basically, you know, clean slate, new core. You know, got rid of some guys. You know, like the Freddie Peralta move, Luis Robert Jr. move. You know, that could pay off. He's an X factor going into the year. You know, change of scenery, better lineup he's going to be in. You know, we'll see how that goes. I like the Bichette move. You know, Jorge Polanco, switch hitter. You know, they're going to be trying him out at first base. We'll see how that goes. Marcus Semien, you know, did a Brandon Nimmo Semien swap, professional hitter. You know, Juan Soto's going to have a big year. Lindor, I know, obviously has the hamate bone injury. So I didn't check to see what his status is. But, you know, he's going to be back at some point. Whether, you know, if he's not back for opening day, he's going to be back, you know, at some point. It's just a tricky injury. But, yeah, Soto's going to have a big year. You know that. You know, listen, got off to a tough start last year. You know, looked like he was miserable, but you know, it was a matter of time before he was going to turn it around. And the fact that he wasn't an all-star is criminal. You know, I mean, guy gets MVP votes but wasn't an all-star. I mean, come on, what are we doing? But yeah, he's going to have a big year too with the Mets. I mean, I'm looking at some of the other guys like, you know, like Vientos and Alvarez and Beatty. How are they going to do this year? And the pitching, you know, like I said, like the Freddie Peralta move, Noah McLean, you know, saw him a little bit in the WBC. You know, got a little bit of a mixed bag, but you know, we'll see. You know, now going to be, you know, this is his first full year, you know, in the majors, and you know, I know there's concern with Sean Manaea, and you know, not a lot of velocity. Velocity is down on his pitches. Kodai Senga, you know, how is he going to bounce back? There are definitely question marks, you know, for both New York teams, you know, but we're talking about the Mets here. I mean, the Mets, part of their collapse was because of their pitching. Bullpen wasn't doing any favors for them. And again, they had to bring up these young guys like Sproat, and they ended up trading in the Peralta, and you know, Tong and McLean. I mean, McLean excelled. You know, the other two guys didn't. Pitching has to bounce back for them. You know, and the bullpen, we'll see what the bullpen brings them. I mean, you got two former Yankees now, Devin Williams at the back end with with Luke Weaver. I'm expecting Luke Weaver to bounce back. I got faith that Luke Weaver can bounce back for this Mets team. And then, you just kind of got to piece it together. I mean, I would have felt a lot better had they would have worked things out with Diaz, but obviously he's with the Dodgers now. But, I think the Mets are going to be good. I think they're going to be good, and I got them winning the NL East. It's going to be close. The Braves, with their injuries, with their pitching staff, you're going to get a full year of Acuna. They've been disappointing the last couple years. So they kind of got to prove themselves again to me. The Phillies, getting on the older side now, but I still think they're going to be a playoff team. So I got the Mets and the Phillies making the playoffs. Dodgers and Padres, and penciling them in out of the West. Dodgers winning the West. In the Central, I got the Cubs winning in the Central. No Kyle Tucker. Alex Bregman, Kyle Tucker now with the Dodgers. And then the Brewers as well. Let's say I know the Brewers, traded Peralta. They just don't want to pay any of their pitchers. But I want to say the Brewers make the postseason. So pretty much the same teams as last year, except Mets make it over the Reds. I don't have the Reds winning. I don't have the Reds getting into the playoffs this year. But you know what? They got some good young players, good young pitching. You got Terry Francona there. I mean, they were able to make it. I mean, listen, I had them making the playoffs last year. They did, just at the expense of the Mets. I don't know if that's going to happen this year, but Ellie De La Cruz obviously, at the forefront of the young players that the Reds have. But that's what I got. So then, in terms of a World Series prediction, it's chalked. It's chalked. I got the Dodgers three-peating because it's hard not to say it because, I mean, just look at the team and they only got better. They added the best closer in baseball and they added one of the best one of the best left-handed hitters in baseball in Kyle Tucker. I mean, his stats were down from last year, but I mean, come on. Now he's in a lineup with Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts and Ohtani and Teoscar Hernandez. I mean, the team is just stacked. And an Achilles heel for them last year was the back end of the bullpen. Well, now you just added the best closer in baseball. So, and then, you got Blake Snell and Yamamoto and Glasnow, and you're gonna have Ohtani pitching a whole year. So it's just that's another team that's got a lot of depth and they're loaded, and they're trying to do something that hasn't been done since the Yankees dynasty back in the late '90s and into the 2000s. But coming out of the AL, listen, Mariners had a chance. George Springer hits that big home run in the seventh inning, put them ahead. Mariners had a chance. They really did to be the team that represents the AL in the World Series, and they did lose Eugenio Suarez, but they got very good pitching. Lineup's good. Cal Raleigh had a rough WBC. In more ways than one. The whole brouhaha with Rosarena, and Rosarena shut all that down. Now they're focused on the season, as it should. That was just a nothing story. I'm going to say that the Mariners get to the World Series. I'm going to say they are the team that gets through the AL, but they will lose to the Dodgers. That's what I got. Dodgers over the Mariners in the World Series. Sorry, I can't pick against the Dodgers. I mean, look, at times last year you thought, maybe the injuries with their pitching staff is gonna meet. They're gonna meet their demise. No, they got healthy at the right time and rode it all the way to the World Series. Very good World Series. That's one of the best World Series you're ever gonna see. Them and the Blue Jays, classic. And I'm not gonna be biased. In the past, you're kind of prone to, well, I was kind of prone. I shouldn't say you. I was, prone to just say, oh yeah, this is the year the Yankees will do it. This is the year the Yankees will do it. No, it's not happening anymore. They got to prove it, and they have failed to do that. Now they did again. They got to the World Series a couple years ago. They did do that, but um, when you saw how it was laid out with all the AL Central teams, you're like, well, how could they not get to the World Series? If they're running into teams like the Blue Jays and they're running into teams like the Mariners with their pitching staff, although the Yankees did well against the Mariners last year, it could spell trouble in the playoffs. So, we'll see how it all goes. But I'm really excited. Baseball is back. Of course, it starts and then I'm going to be going away. So, I will be subjected to a potential third time in a row June swoon because I won't have like that long vacation that keeps me away from the team for a bit. Because a couple years ago, went away in July when they were going through it. They did make it to the World Series, but still they struggled over the summer. And then last year was away, you know, around the same time, a little later, and same thing. No, it was end of July. End of July, I was away, and they were struggling. Now it was at the trade deadline. Then they made all these trades. I was like, wow, gonna come home to a new team. And then night before I go home, and that was when they blew that game to the Marlins. And all of the pitchers that they got, Bednar, Jake Bird, and Doval, they all gave up runs, and Caballero misplayed a ball in the outfield. Man, that was a time. That was a time. But yeah, those guys are going to play huge roles for the Yankees. Doval looked good in the WBC. Jake Bird had a good spring training. So hopefully those guys step up because the Yankees are going to need it. The Yankees have pitching depth, but there's going to be guys that are going to have to step up with the bullpen. That's another concern. But starting pitching depth, they have a ton of it, and some of those guys can end up being long relievers out of the bullpen. So. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to get into. But yeah, listen, I hope you guys, enjoy baseball being back. Weather hopefully starts to get warmer, depending on where you are. On this, on this big globe that we live on. Wherever you're watching. But as always, everybody, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the video, to the channel. Make sure to follow us on social media platforms in the description below. And wherever you get your podcasts, make sure to listen to us as well. Just look up Infinite Sports. And you will find us there. And as always, everybody, I'm your host, Kenneth Grunfelder, signing off. Have a good one, and I will talk to you guys next time. Take care.